In the packed hearing room, as her opponent screamed at her to accuse Jasmine Crockett of making things up to make her name better, she suddenly slammed a thick file down on the table. One by one, pages stamped confidential with red ink were revealed. An irregular birth certificate, altered hospital records, and finally a DNA test from Switzerland that confirmed Donald Trump was not Barron's biological father. The moment Crockett looked straight into the camera and announced the real name, Jared Kushner, the hall erupted in screams. The press screamed, and America was stunned by unprecedented shock. Why were the Swiss DNA results never released to the public? And what is Donald Trump hiding behind this secrecy? Watch until the end to find out the truth. The congressional hearing room was blinding under the harsh white lights, every corner filled with cameras broadcasting live across the country. The air was heavy, like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. Rows of lawmakers shifted in their seats, whispering to one another, their faces tense as though they already knew something explosive was about to drop. Reporters packed the back of the room, typing frantically on their laptops. Some already lived tweeting before anything had even started. The sound of shuffling papers and hushed murmurs echoed off the tall marble walls. But under it all was a silence that felt unnatural, too tight, as if the whole nation had gathered in that room waiting for one single voice. Jasmine Crockett stepped forward from the shadows of the corridor, the thick folder of documents pressed firmly in her hands. She wasn't smiling, not even pretending to. Her eyes were locked ahead, sharp, focused, almost daring anyone to stop her. The weight of the folder seemed to pull on her shoulders, but she carried it like a weapon. Around her, a few Republican members leaned toward each other, whispering under their breath, clearly nervous about what she might reveal. Outside, cameras flashed through the glass windows as journalists pushed against the security lines, desperate to capture her expression before she even spoke a word. Everyone could sense it, the kind of tension that only came before a storm. She took her seat at the long mahogany table, sliding the folder in front of her. The buzz of conversation grew louder for a second, then cut off abruptly when the chairman of the committee raised his gavel. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber as wood slammed against wood. "This hearing will now come to order," he declared. The sound lingered in the air, pulling the room into silence. Every lawmaker straightened, every camera zoomed closer, and every viewer at home leaned forward in their seat. For a moment, the only sound left was the faint hum of the broadcast equipment, capturing the scene for millions of Americans who had no idea what was about to hit them. The chairman's gavel had barely left the wood when Senator John Kennedy leaned forward, his voice loud enough to cut through the heavy silence. "Let's be honest with the American people," he said, his drawl slow but dripping with accusation. "This isn't oversight. This isn't about facts. This is about you, Congresswoman Crockett, chasing headlines. You want to smear the former president and his family, drag this institution through the mud, just so you can see your name splashed across tomorrow's papers." He wagged his finger toward her, his face tight with disdain. Around him, a few of his Republican colleagues smirked, some chuckled under their breath. It was the first open shot of the hearing, and it landed with deliberate venom. The air shifted. Reporters at the back of the room straightened in their seats, pens flying across notepads. Camera operators adjusted their lenses, capturing every twitch of Kennedy's lips, every flicker of tension across Crockett's face. For a moment, all eyes were on her, waiting, testing, wondering if she would hesitate under the weight of the attack. But Jasmine Crockett didn't hesitate. She slid her chair forward, leaning into the microphone, until her voice filled the room. Calm at first, then sharper, each word carried like a bell tolling through the chamber. "This is not a circus. This is Congress, and today, the truth is on trial." Gasps swept across the audience seating. Kennedy stiffened, his smirk fading as the cameras zoomed in, catching the flicker of unease in his eyes. The reporters' fingers clattered faster on keyboards, headlines already forming in real time. The sentence wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a declaration of war. Then the room broke open. One Republican lawmaker slammed his palm on the desk, shouting, "Point of order! She cannot introduce classified material." Another barked, "Strike her comments from the record." "This is slander." A third rose half out of his seat, red-faced, pointing toward the folder in front of Crockett. "If she dares open that, she's breaking federal law." Their voices tangled together in a wall of noise, a coordinated attempt to drown her out. The chairman hammered his gavel again and again, shouting, "Order! Order in this chamber!" But the chaos only thickened. Crockett didn't move. She rested her hand on the thick manila folder like it was a loaded weapon, her eyes never leaving her opponents. The louder they grew, the calmer she seemed, as though the fury swirling around her only confirmed she was holding something they desperately wanted buried. The cameras panned across the room, Kennedy whispering frantically to an aide, Republican allies shouting over one another, Democrats leaning in with grim faces, and Crockett, silent, steady, waiting for the storm to burn itself out. The viewers at home could see it plainly. The louder her enemies screamed, the more afraid they looked. And in that moment, every American watching understood. Whatever sat inside that folder was dangerous enough to shake the walls of Congress. The uproar in the chamber finally dulled, though not because tempers had cooled. It was the way Jasmine Crockett sat, composed, unshaken, her hand resting on the folder as if it were the lever to a hidden trapdoor. The chairman's gavel gave a final crack, and the hearing room held its breath. Crockett leaned into her microphone, her voice lower now, but somehow louder than the chaos that had come before. This investigation did not start with rumors. It began with someone who knew the truth, someone who stood guard over the Trump family itself. The words landed like thunder. A ripple went through the lawmakers' rows, aides shifting nervously, pens pausing mid-scribble. Senator Kennedy frowned and whispered something sharp to the man beside him, but his eyes never left Crockett. She continued, her tone measured, deliberate. A member of the Trump family's personal security detail. A man who saw too much, heard too much, and finally could not stay silent. He reached out. He risked everything. And what he provided is here today, in my hands. Gas escaped from the press gallery. A camera light snapped on, then another as journalists fought to capture the moment. Crockett unlatched the folder, the sound of the metal clips snapping open, slicing through the silence. She pulled out the first document slowly, almost ceremonially, and held it where the cameras could zoom in. Across the top, in thick red letters, was a stamp that screamed, "Confidential." The crowd shifted, a low murmur rolling through the chamber. "This," she said, her eyes fixed on Kennedy, "is a birth certificate, but not the one the American people were shown. This record, filed at Manhattan Memorial, lists a different attending physician, a different set of circumstances, and a notation that raises questions this committee cannot ignore." She let the page rest flat on the table, the red stamp burning under the lights. The room stirred like a hive. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, arms crossed tightly, but his jaw was clenched hard enough to show strain. Another senator barked, "Objection! This is hearsay. That document is a forgery." Crockett didn't blink. She slid out the second stack of papers, hospital intake forms, records of procedures, signatures that didn't match the official story. She raised one page high enough for the cameras to catch the scrawled name of Dr. Elizabeth Harrison. "This doctor," Crockett said, her voice cutting through the noise, "swore in an affidavit that what she saw during those nights in March of 2006 still haunts her to this day." The chamber erupted again, lawmakers shouting, reporters shouting over them, the chairman pounding his gavel. But Crockett didn't retreat. She reached for the final set of papers, pulling them out with a calmness that only made the moment more terrifying. She unfolded them carefully, then lifted the top page so the cameras had a clean shot. The red stamp glared back at the nation. "Confidential. DNA report." The sound drained out of the room. Even the hecklers fell silent. The air conditioning hum could be heard on the microphones. Crockett let the silence drag for one long, punishing beat before speaking. "This analysis, conducted by an independent Swiss laboratory, compares genetic markers from multiple sources. The conclusion is not speculative. It is not uncertain. It is scientific fact. And it does not match the narrative the American people have been told." Her words landed like hammer blows. Viewers at home leaned forward. In the chamber, reporters clutched their headphones, repeating her words to newsrooms already scrambling to rewrite their front pages. The senators shifted, some pale, some furious, some simply stunned. Kennedy shook his head, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. The cameras zoomed in on the page, every number, every line of analysis magnified across the screens of millions of Americans. And in that moment, no one cared about the shouting, the objections, or the pounding of gavels. They cared about what those black and white lines meant. The possibility that the story of one of America's most powerful families was built on a lie. The room was still buzzing from the DNA report when Jasmine Crockett leaned forward again, her eyes narrowing as she slid a fresh document across the polished wood. "The paper trail is one thing," she said, her voice steady, "but testimony is another. And today this committee will hear from people who were there." She lifted the first affidavit, its embossed seal catching the light. This statement comes from Dr. Patricia Williams, a retired gynecologist who worked at Manhattan Memorial Hospital. She was on duty the night of Barron Trump's birth. Crockett paused, letting the weight of her words sink in before she continued. "Dr. Williams is not a political figure. She has no book deal, no agenda. She is a doctor, now elderly, who says she could no longer live with what she witnessed." The affidavit was projected on the committee screens. The handwriting wavered, almost trembling across the page. Crockett began to read aloud. "I was present for the delivery in March 2006. The procedures that night were unusual, involving multiple physicians and extraordinary security measures. I was ordered to sign paperwork that did not reflect what occurred in that room. I complied, but I have regretted it every day since. It haunts me still." The words echoed in the chamber. For a moment, the shouting stopped. Even Kennedy, arms crossed, looked unsettled. Reporters typed furiously, some mouthing the words as they appeared on screen. Crockett's voice softened, almost tender. "Dr. Williams put these words down under penalty of perjury. She has carried this for nearly 20 years, afraid of what might happen if she spoke." Before anyone could respond, Crockett pulled out another folder. "But she is not the only one." She held up typed pages, stamped with another notary seal. "This is the sworn testimony of Janet Morrison, a former employee at a private retreat facility in upstate New York. She worked there during the exact period of Melania Trump's pregnancy." Crockett looked directly at Kennedy, then back at the cameras. "And she swears that Mrs. Trump was not alone." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Crockett read, "A man visited frequently, sometimes overnight. He was tall, well-dressed, and not Mr. Trump. I did not know his name at the time, but I later recognized him on television. I cannot forget his face, nor the fact that he stayed with Mrs. Trump for long hours during her pregnancy." The chamber erupted. One senator shouted, "This is outrageous hearsay." Another slammed his hand on the table. "Strike it from the record." The chairman pounded his gavel, calling for order, but the protests only grew louder. Reporters leapt to their feet, some already dashing into the hall to call their editors. Phones buzzed across the chamber as live tweets exploded. Crockett didn't flinch. She flipped the page, revealing receipts, cash transactions from the Trump Organization funneled to the retreat during those same weeks. "This is not gossip. These payments line up exactly with Morrison's testimony. The logs show Melania Trump checked in, and the man Morrison described visited again and again." She set the papers down with a sharp slap that made even the chairman glance nervously at the cameras. The opposing side grew frantic. Kennedy barked, "This is a sham, a smear job." Another senator shouted, "You are disgracing this institution, Congresswoman." Their voices tangled, a wall of anger meant to drown her out. But it was too late. The picture was already burned into the minds of everyone watching. A trembling doctor haunted by her silence, and a retreat employee swearing that Melania's pregnancy was not what America had been told. For a moment, the hearing didn't feel like politics anymore. It felt like a trial where history itself was the jury, and the evidence was starting to pile too high to ignore. The chamber was already boiling when Jasmine Crockett slid a new stack of papers across the table. She didn't raise her voice, but the calm in her tone cut sharper than the shouting around her. "Money leaves footprints," she said, "and these footprints lead to the truth." She fanned out a row of exhibits, each page bearing bank logos, signatures, and wire codes. The camera zoomed in, the bold black ink glowing under the bright lights. Reporters gasped as she began pointing to the pages one by one. Here, $500,000 wired directly to a Manhattan fertility clinic. The memo line lists consulting services, but the clinic has never provided such services. Here, 3 checks, each signed by an intermediary of the Trump Organization, cashed by a private retreat facility, the same retreat where Mrs. Trump stayed during her pregnancy. And here, legal retainers, paid out to staff members, coinciding exactly with when they left their positions. Retainers that match the amounts listed in these non-disclosure agreements. The words rolled like hammer blows. Senators craned over their desks, aides scrambled with notepads, and the gallery buzzed with frantic whispers. Kennedy leaned back stiffly, arms crossed, but the camera caught his foot tapping beneath the desk. Crockett didn't slow down. She reached for the last envelope in the pile, sealed with a foreign courier's mark. The chamber seemed to shrink as she tore it open, drawing out a thin folder marked in bold black letters. Genetic analysis, confidential. She let the cover page rest on the table, just long enough for the cameras to lock in before lifting her eyes to the microphone. This report, she said, came from Zurich, from one of the most discreet and respected laboratories in the world. Samples were sent shortly after Barron Trump's birth. 3 profiles were analyzed: Donald Trump, Melania Trump, and the child. The gallery gasped, the words heavy with implications. She flipped the page, reading each line slowly, her voice cutting through the silence. Results exclude Donald J. Trump as the biological father, with a probability of 99.7%. The chamber detonated. Reporters shouted over one another. Senators leapt from their seats. One slammed his fist on the desk. "Out of order! This is a smear job." Another shouted, "Strike that from the record." The chairman pounded his gavel over and over, the sharp cracks echoing like gunfire. But no one was listening. The hearing had lost control. Through the storm, Crockett didn't blink. She held up the report so the cameras could capture every line of text, the words broadcast in real time into millions of homes. This is not speculation. This is not rumor. This is science. Independent, verified, undeniable science. Her words rang out clear, and the cameras caught her hand trembling just slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer gravity of the revelation. Kennedy leaned toward his microphone, voice raised above the din. "This is disgraceful. You're parading gossip as fact. You're poisoning this institution." The chairman slammed his gavel again, barking for order. But Crockett leaned in, her voice steady, unshaken. "The evidence speaks louder than outrage." The line cut through the uproar like a blade. For a moment, even the shouting faltered. The gavel cracked once more, but the silence that followed wasn't obedience. It was disbelief. Everyone in that chamber and everyone watching at home understood what had just been said. The foundation of the Trump family story had been shattered, and no amount of yelling could put it back together again. Jasmine Crockett let the DNA report sink in for a moment before reaching back into the folder. The room was still buzzing when she laid down a new stack of documents, contracts bound together with thick black clips. She slid the first page under the camera lens, and the bold header came into view. Non-disclosure agreement. "These," she said, tapping the page, "are NDAs worth millions of dollars, signed by doctors, nurses, lab technicians, even members of the Trump family's inner circle. Each one tied to payments, each one buying silence." She flipped page after page, the signatures scrolling across the screens for the nation to see. This is not normal confidentiality. These are bribes, contracts designed to bury the truth and to keep professionals who knew better from speaking out. A murmur rippled across the gallery. Reporters scrambled to snap photos. Senators leaned forward, some pale, others visibly furious. Kennedy shook his head, muttering under his breath, but his eyes never left the documents. Then Crockett reached for a small black device. She placed it on the table, pressed a button, and the speakers crackled to life. At first there was static, then a familiar voice, louder, sharper than anyone expected. Donald Trump himself caught on tape. "I don't care how much it costs. Shut them up. Do you understand me? Shut them up." The chamber froze. Every head turned toward the speakers as the voice continued, angrier now. "We can't let this get out. We'll pay, we'll sue, whatever it takes." "I want this buried," a gasp swept through the room. Even the chairman, who had been pounding his gavel minutes earlier, sat back in stunned silence. For the first time all day, no one moved. The only sound was Trump's voice echoing across the marble walls. When the recording clicked off, Crockett leaned into her mic. "That is the former president speaking to his legal team. Recorded, authenticated, verified. His own words, bury the truth." The room hadn't recovered when she dropped the final hammer. She pulled out another folder, this one stamped with the seal of a federal office. "And this," she said, her voice sharper now, "shows how deep the cover-up went." Birth records from Manhattan Memorial were altered. Doctors' names changed, timelines adjusted. And it wasn't done by hospital staff. It was done with government clearance. She let the words hang, then added, "We have sworn statements that officials in 2 federal agencies were pressured and paid to manipulate those files." The gallery exploded in shouts, some reporters leaping from their seats, senators throwing up their hands in disbelief. The chairman tried to restore order, but the chamber was already gone. The story was bigger than the room, bigger than the gavel, bigger than the shouting. And as Crockett sat quietly, hands folded on the table, the weight of it all pressed down on everyone present. This wasn't just scandal anymore. It was conspiracy, corruption, and the machinery of power exposed for the entire country to see. The chamber was still shaking from the recordings when Jasmine Crockett placed her hands flat on the table. She didn't reach for another document this time. She didn't shuffle papers. She just sat still, her eyes locked on the camera broadcasting live to millions of homes. The silence stretched so long it was almost unbearable. Even the senators who had been shouting minutes earlier leaned forward, unable to look away. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, calm, and heavy. "The evidence has led us here. Medical records, financial trails, sworn affidavits, DNA analysis. All of it points to one conclusion. The truth is not speculation. It is not rumor. It is fact." She paused, letting the weight of her words hang. The chamber held its breath. The only sound was the soft hum of the microphones and the faint click of camera shutters. Then she said it, clear, sharp, unflinching. "The biological father of Barron Trump is Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's own son-in-law and his senior advisor in the White House." The chamber exploded. Gasps, screams, and shouted curses erupted all at once. Reporters stumbled over one another, rushing for the exits. Phones pressed to their ears as they screamed into live calls. Senators clutched at their desks, some shouting denials, others frozen in shock. A woman in the gallery let out an audible sob. The cameras caught every second of it. The chaos, the disbelief, the sheer devastation of what had just been said. The chairman's gavel slammed down over and over. "Order! Order in this chamber!" But the noise only grew louder. Kennedy shot to his feet, red-faced, pointing at Crockett as he barked, "This is outrageous! This is treasonous!" But his voice was swallowed by the roar of the room. Through it all, Crockett never looked away from the camera. Her eyes were steady, her expression grave. She didn't shout, didn't move. She just let the words she had spoken hang in the air like a detonation, their echoes already racing across the nation. It was no longer just a scandal. It was betrayal inside one of the most powerful families in America. And in that moment, everyone understood. Politics, power, loyalty, all of it had just been shattered by a truth too devastating to ignore. The chamber was on fire. Senators from the opposing side shot out of their seats, some waving their arms, others shouting over one another. "Defamation!" one screamed, his voice cracking. Another slammed his fist on the desk and barked, "This hearing must be suspended immediately." This is an abuse of power. The word defamation echoed like a chorus, each opponent trying to shout louder than the last. The chairman's gavel banged in desperation, but the noise only swelled, a frenzy of anger and disbelief. Crockett sat still, letting them rage. She didn't argue. She didn't shout back. When the noise reached its peak, she reached calmly into her folder one final time. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded neatly but worn at the edges. She lifted it for the cameras to see, her voice steady as she spoke. "This," what she said, "is a private letter written on Trump Tower letterhead. It was obtained through the same source who risked everything to expose this conspiracy. And in this letter, Melania Trump wrote directly to Jared Kushner about their son." The room wavered, the shouting softening into uneasy murmurs. Crockett unfolded the page and read aloud. "Our beautiful boy will never know the truth unless we choose to tell him. I worry every day about the secret we share and how long we can keep it hidden." The chamber went silent. Every senator froze. Every reporter stopped typing. Every camera locked in tight on Crockett's face. Even the chairman, gavel still in his hand, stared blankly at the letter projected on the screen behind her. The words lingered in the air like smoke, heavy and undeniable. For a long moment, no one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. And then, like a dam breaking, the explosion came. Reporters bolted for the exits, tripping over cables as they screamed updates into their phones. Senators shouted at one another, pointing across the aisle, some demanding recess, others calling for immediate subpoenas. The gallery erupted in gasps, cries, even applause from a few who couldn't contain themselves. The chairman's gavel slammed down again and again, his voice straining over the roar. "Order! Order in this chamber!" But there was no order left to give. Crockett folded the letter and slid it back into the folder, her expression calm, almost grim. She didn't need to say another word. The letter had done what hours of documents, affidavits, and testimony could not. It pierced through the noise with undeniable clarity. In that instant, every person in the room, and every American watching from home, knew the truth had landed. The hearing room was still vibrating from the letter when Jasmine Crockett leaned back into her microphone. Her tone shifted, heavier now, each word dropping like lead. "This story doesn't end with family secrets," she said. "It doesn't even end with cover-ups inside our government. Because the truth is, foreign intelligence services already knew." A chill swept through the chamber. Senators stopped mid-shout. Reporters froze in place, their pens hanging over paper. Crockett continued, her voice steady, her eyes locked on the cameras. "We have intercepted communications from multiple nations. They discussed this secret not as rumor, but as leverage. They debated when to reveal it and how it could be used to weaken the American presidency. They had what the American people did not, knowledge of a vulnerability at the very center of our government." Gasps rippled across the gallery. Crockett pulled another page from her folder, this one bearing the seal of a U.S. intelligence agency. She read, "Subject: Potential compromise of executive office due to concealed paternity information. Foreign actors may attempt to exploit knowledge for policy concessions." The words on the page were cold, clinical, but the meaning was devastating. She laid the document flat on the table, then looked directly at her colleagues. Think about it. Foreign governments sitting across the table from the President of the United States, knowing something he had to hide, knowing a secret that could destroy him, his family, his party, in one blow. And you wonder why certain decisions made no sense? Why certain policies shifted without warning? The room erupted again, but this time it wasn't the same raw outrage as before. It was fear. Senators whispered furiously, some glancing at one another with pale faces. Aides darted in and out of the chamber with phones pressed to their ears. Reporters typed frantically, the words "national security breach" already spreading online. Crockett didn't let the noise drown her out. She raised her voice just enough to pierce through. "If true, this is not just a family scandal. This is a national security breach." The words landed like a hammer. The cameras caught the expressions across the dais. Shock, dread, disbelief. The weight of her statement pressed down on the room like a storm cloud, thick and suffocating. For the first time, the hearing didn't just feel like a political fight. It felt like the country itself was in danger. And every person watching, inside the chamber and across America, knew the consequences of this revelation would reach far beyond Washington. The hearing chamber was no longer a room. It felt like a crater after an explosion. Papers lay scattered across the long table. Senators sat frozen in their chairs, and the gallery remained hushed as though even breathing might break the spell of what had just been revealed. Jasmine Crockett adjusted the microphone one last time. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every ear was already tuned to her words. "The truth does not need permission," she said, pausing just long enough for the silence to stretch tight. "It needs courage." The words rolled through the chamber, not loud but unshakable, echoing against the marble walls and carried live into millions of homes. For a long moment, no one responded. No gavel, no shouts, not even whispers. Just stunned silence. Outside those walls, the reaction was instant. Networks cut into live programming, anchors stumbling over their words as they tried to process the revelations in real time. On the Capitol steps, reporters shouted updates into cameras, their voices almost trembling. Within minutes, news tickers across the globe flashed the same headline: Crockett hearing rocks Trump dynasty, Kushner named as Barron's father. Inside Washington, the machinery of government roared awake. Calls for independent investigations swept through both chambers of Congress. Legal analysts filled television screens, predicting indictments, hearings, and subpoenas that could stretch for years. Some lawmakers demanded resignations, others called for calm, but no one could deny that a line had been crossed, one that could never be erased. Across the country, households split. Some watched in disbelief, shaking their heads, refusing to believe what they had heard. Others wept openly, shocked at how deep the deception had gone. Still others sat quietly, the weight of it all sinking in, knowing they were witnessing a chapter of history that future generations would study in disbelief. And then the silence broke. In kitchens, on factory floors, in bars, and on sidewalks, Americans erupted into debate. Was it treachery? Was it justice? Was it both? The nation fractured into argument, but united in one truth. Nothing would be the same after this day. The hearing ended not with a bang of the gavel, but with the weight of history pressing down on everyone who had been present. A dark chapter had been opened, and no one, not the lawmakers in that chamber, not the reporters sprinting to their deadlines, not the millions of viewers across America, could close it again. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next dramatic chapter. This story is 100% fictional and not real. It has been created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters mentioned in this story, including Jasmine Crockett, Donald Trump, John Kennedy, Melania Trump, Jared Kushner, Barron Trump, and others, are not real characters within this narrative. Any resemblance to real people, living or dead, is purely coincidental.